another tip because the biggest thing that I've learned about my orchids is it's not necessarily the soil, but there is a key ingredient that I love to use. It's actually used in a lot of places.
All right, so Scott is going to share with us about the medium or the soil, but I'm going to let him tell you what he's got in mind.
Okay, so I was speaking about the medium that I use, and it's a little bit of a secret, although this is used in a lot of different plant soils to help amend a soil that doesn't have a lot of nutrition. And I did a little bit of Googling, to, when I had an orchid that was a little bit in distress, and I felt, well, I need to just kind of experiment here. And it really is just an experiment that I found out was a good tip because it worked great. The medium is, get ready, peat moss, okay? However, there's different levels of peat moss. When I say peat moss, we're talking about the underlayer of the natural growing moss that occurs in the wild, okay? The peat is actually the portion underneath the growing plant, okay? So the secret ingredient, sphagnum moss, this is the live portion of the peat that you find growing in the bog. So if you're brave and you want to go out into the wilderness and take your galoshes.
Oh yeah,
all right.
The swamp
Yeah,
boots.
you got to go down into the swamp to find it. So anyway, the sphagnum, which again is the live portion of the peat moss, when you use it in the pot for your orchid, it's going to act like a sponge and only provide the necessary amount of moisture. So it retains the moisture or the excess moisture so that your orchid or your plant is not getting too much moisture. All right, so I'm going to take my sphagnum moss and I'm going to work on repotting this orchid here today. And I love the fact that it has a little keiki growing at the top. A keiki is a Hawaiian term which refers to a plant offspring or baby.
Oh.
I love the little keikis. These are typical little containers that the orchids come in. And don't be afraid to just kind of pull it on out. It's okay if the roots fall or if the dirt kind of gets everywhere. You kind of really want to loosen it up and give it some space anyway. And as you look at that, you can see these roots are kind of struggling, okay? There's really not any green life in the roots.
And it's very flat. It's not full of moisture.
Yeah. This was planted in sphagnum. It's nice and brown in there, so it's been in there quite a while. We just need to bring some life to it by adding the live medium. Okay?
Yes, okay.
So I'm loosening it up kind of like I do any of the plants that I would repot. You want to give those roots some space to breathe and replicate.
Oh yes, yes, yeah. It does look. It needs some love.
Yeah. So we're hopefully in about a month or so we're going to see this thing just really liven up.
And what will we see? What will be the evidence that it's doing well? Will we start to get some more little...
That's a great question.
Did you call them keikis or...
I'm going to go ahead and take this and let's just look, because you're going to see not the keikis, but you're going to see the root
look at the
to just green up, right? It's going to have nice green roots.
Look,
okay?
What a difference.
Instead of that brown.
Right. Here, let's put the two next to each other. Oh goodness, look at how pretty and green this is. And this is just pretty lifeless. Yeah. Oh, this is great information.
Okay, so you can see what I have done is removed my orchid from the original nursery container that it was grown in, and it's pretty spacious for that size. What I want to do is give it a little more medium that is alive and thriving at the bottom, and allow those roots to expand and grow.
Right.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to go with 4. I like even numbers and I like symmetry.
Yes, Scott, would you say that again? You like symmetry?
I love symmetry.
For those of us who know Gretchen the Green Lady, she's Sally Symmetrical.
Okay. It's great.
All right, so you've got your holes in there now. So what's the next step?
All right, so we're just going to add, I'm going to start with my sphagnum moss.
Okay.
And it's just ooey gooey.
Yes.
Okay, but it's just full of life.
Yes.
Nice and green, and that's what you want to see. We're going to just throw that in the bottom.
So do you, Scott, add any more peat moss to this? Or you're just, is this, will
keep
this
in
supply
mind,
enough?
Great question, Gretchen. Keep in mind that the peat is the expired or the previous portion of the sphagnum, okay?
Okay.
So maybe the last season of the sphagnum, underneath that green growth, you're going to find the peat.
Oh, such good information. Okay.
So the question is this more about sphagnum or orchids, you know?
Oh,
I think it's more about the sphagnum.
It's about both, because if you can't give the plant the nutrients in the soil that it needs, you're not going to have a healthy plant.
No, not at all.
Right. Soil is so important. And there's so many wonderful micronutrients in there, not just for the plant, but guess what? For us too.
Oh, okay. Absolutely.
FYI.
Just a little tip about the sphagnum. If you happen to capture some and you want to continue to propagate it, and I kind of do because I'm not going to go out every week and put on my boots. I would love to because I'm a nature guy. I love to be outdoors.
Right.
So anytime I'm out there, I want to just maybe bring a 5-gallon bucket and collect something.
Scott, you were talking about propagating the sphagnum moss.
You just kind of want to think about how it occurs naturally in nature. There's a good canopy, and that canopy is always dropping these organic materials, right? And so that's laying there on the forest floor. But it's also going to need a lot of water, so it just stays wet. It is a moss. But having said that, you're going to want to put underneath your sphagnum a little of your compost.
Okay.
I really don't demonstrate that well here because you can see these roots are just growing through.
And compost, you're not referring to like vegetable compost from your gardens. Tell me what you're talking about.
No,
I
would say more of that dry raked mixture, like the leaf or the pine needles.
Okay, so you want just like, so if I get some, like I have lots of maple leaves and pine needles and oak leaves that maybe are a little brown, that would be good?
Yes.
Oh, that's good
Absolutely. All right. All right, so about 3/4 full, and you're going to just place it loosely in there. We're going to leave a little space to add some extra sphagnum. Everybody say sphagnum.
Sphagnum. Spell that. Is that S-P-H?
H.
S-P-H. Sphagnum.
S-P-H-A-G-U-M.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. We'll put that in the video so that we can all say it and spell it correctly. Look at that. That's just so wonderful. Gosh.
Today I'm putting it in fresh and wet. Again, it's a moss, and so it's going to be mossy and wet, which means I'm not going to water this for a while. It's already very moist, and
should have enough water in it to hold it for, what do you say, a couple weeks?
I would say 2 weeks, and then check it.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow. Now that didn't look difficult at all. That was, and did you get your hands dirty?
Yeah,
oh,
nice and dirty. Here we go.
Yes. All right.
Good nutrients.
So Scott, tell me why we're standing here at a window.
All right, we forgot to discuss the need for sunlight. And just like any plant, an orchid needs that bright sunlight, but it needs to be indirect light. So after you've finished your repot, it doesn't need to be complicated. You know you're already putting it into a humid room with a temperature above 68 degrees. and then make sure that you get a good amount of light each day, 4 to 6 hours of indirect bright
You
sunlight.
actually have a few more tips that we've thought of. What can you tell us about dormancy, nutrients?
Yeah, so the question came about the dormancy period, and I've just learned that dormancy for an orchid, what I have learned from my experience is that it occurs based on the temperature that it's kept. So again, if you're not keeping it at that above 68 degrees, it's going to kind of go into a dormant phase.
Okay.
You're going to lose the blooms, and it may not come back that year. So you may have to wait about 2 years. It's going to have like about a year dormancy before it will bloom again.
Okay. And then what can bring it out of dormancy?
Just want to give it TLC like any other plant, and the nutrients that it's going to get. You know, don't stress too much about the fertilizer. If you use my tip, which is using the sphagnum moss, that's the one ingredient that I found to be successful.
Okay.
I literally took a orchid that was in a stage like this with no spike and no blooms, did the repot. Of course, these roots look really nice.
But we saw what an unhealthy root looks like.
Yeah,
so
and
that's
so,
a good sign for the grower.
Yeah, taking the repot experience, doing that with the sphagnum,
Okay.
is going to give it the nutrients that it needs.
So now tell me about water. Can we overwater this?
Well, it is possible to overwater an orchid.
But
yeah.
does it like it?
Well, does it like too much water? No. You know, it's going to want the right amount.
Should the grower allow their root base and their soil to dry out before they water it again?
I think as a general rule, I've kind of learned that you use the touch method, and if it feels anyway moist, leave it alone.
Right.
Don't even bother. It's going to be fine. But once you begin to notice that dry surface and this to me feels dry, you know.
Yeah, let's look at that.
Yeah, so that.
I mean, even the moss on top is dry.
Yeah.
So that is a sign. And I did a video on how to tell when your pots need to be watered. If it's moist on top, like you just said, that means the rest of the soil is fine. But if it's dry, like you just showed us, it does need some water.
Yeah, absolutely.
So here we have all the different stages of an orchid. Oh, and here was an orchid that he had from last year. We have orchids in full bloom. We have the orchid that was just transplanted. Oh, look at those. Oh, so beautiful.
Leave some space, and we're going